And we learned yesterday that when you tear Kriya, it's supposed to be torn while standing. We learned this out from Eov, because it says, Vayakom Vayikra, that he stood up and he tore Kriya. So we're going to elaborate on this halacha just a little bit more. On the fourth line of DAF Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, Amar Rami Bar Chama, Minayin L'Kriya Shehi Mu'umad. How do you know that when you tear, you have to tear standing? Shene'amar Vayakom Eov Vayikra. That Eov arose and he tore. So the Gemara says, but maybe that's not a good proof, because Dilma Milsa Yisertuhu Da'avad. Maybe Eov was acting excessively beyond the letter of the law. Di'ilo Tema Hachi Vayagos Isrosho Hachanami. Because if you don't say that, consider the next part of the pasuk. It says that he tore out his hair. No one's going to tell you that an Avil is halachically required to tear out his hair. We know that that's not the case. So therefore, the fact that he stood up and tore is not necessarily proof that that's a halachic requirement. It could just be that's what he did. Ella mehacha. So the Gemara says, we learn it out from another pasuk. Vayakom hamelech vayikra es begadav. This is talking about David Hamelech in Shmuel Beis. He had a son Amnon who did something terrible to his sister Tamar, and Avshalom, who was Tamar's full brother, went ahead and killed Amnon sometime later. And when David finds out about it, it says that the king arose and he tore his clothes. So you see that standing is a requirement for Kriya. So the Gemara says, maybe not so. V'dilma mils yeserta Avid. Maybe here too we could say that David acted excessively. Di'ilote mahachi, and this Gemara here now is a little bit difficult to maneuver, but I'll try to explain it as best I can. If you don't say that, in other words, you really don't see necessarily the halachic prescription in this pasuk, because look at the next part. It says Vayishkav arza. It says that he lay down on the ground. Hachanami, are you telling me that that's also a fulfillment of one's halachic requirement? V'hatanya yashav al gabe mita al gabe kisei al gabe udaini. That if a person sits down on a bed or on a chair when he's an avil, or on a mortar, like some kind of instrument or can, right? Or, and the girsa of the riff over here is Gedola Mikula Namru, and even more than that, Afilu al Gabe Karka. Even if a person sits down on the floor, but he has not overturned his bed, right? That's the point over here. Lo yatsa yadecha baso. He hasn't fulfilled his obligation. So therefore, the Gemara's argument over here is basically this. How can you tell me that this pasuk is descriptive of David's fulfillment of his halachic requirements when lying or sitting on the floor is not a fulfillment of the halachic requirement? Really, it should have said that he turned over his bed. If this pasuk was descriptive of his halachic duties, then it should have said that whatever he did for Kriya, and whatever he did for overturning his bed, he overturned his bed. But that's not what the pasuk says. That if you just sit on the floor, you haven't fulfilled the obligation of overturning your bed. So the Gemara says, no, you're right, that's true if you don't overturn your bed, but the way you understand the pasuk is, Amarle Ke'ein Arza. The pasuk means that was he lying on the ground? He was lying on the ground because he overturned his bed. And it means he was lying on the ground, Ke'ein Arza, meaning that it was as if, because basically when you overturn your bed, you basically lie on the overturned bed. That's really what you do. So it was as if he was sitting, as if he was lying down that's what it means, as if he's lying on the ground, which means he's lying on his overturned bed, which is now all the way on the ground. But the point is that the pasuk in the conclusion is descriptive of David's halachic requirements, and therefore when it says that he arose and he tore, that too is descriptive of his halachic requirements, and really this is the final proof text that when you tear, you have to tear standing. Okay, Tanu Rabbana. Elu divarim she'avel asur bahen. The following things are prohibited for an avel. Asur b'malach, and as we'll see, they pretty much sync with the prohibitions that we have on Tisha B'Av. Asur b'malacha uverachitza uvesicha uvetashmish hamita uvenilas hasandal. He cannot work, he cannot bathe, he cannot anoint himself with perfumes, he cannot be intimate with his wife, and he cannot wear shoes. V'asur likros b'torah uvenevim uviksuvim ulashanos b'mishnah b'midrash uvahalachos uvahashas uva'agados. Nor can he learn any facet of Torah study. V'imhayu rabim tzrichim lo eno nimna. However, with one exception, if he is needed because he's the Rebbe, he's the teacher of the yeshiva, and the masses need him in order to be able to study Torah, then even during Shiva he's allowed to give a Torah lecture. And you see from here also Tosfos equivocates on the point of is an Avil allowed to learn those portions of Torah that are mournful, like Sefer Eov and portions of Sefer Yirmiyah? Tosfos' conclusion is that even though the Gemara doesn't say it explicitly, yes, he's pretty much equivalent to what our restrictions are on Tisha B'Av. So the Gemara then describing this whole story about if the Rabbim tzrichim lo, if the masses need him, umasa umeis benosha Rabbi Yossi b'tzipori v'nichnas lebeis hamedrash v'dorish kol hayom kulo. To wit, Rabbi Yossi once lost a child, and yet during Shiva he still went ahead and gave the public lecture for the entire day in the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Bar Bar Chana Isra Abe Milsa. Rabbi Bar Bar Chana also suffered a loss. He figured, you know what, I'm not going to go out to the Beis Medrash today and give my shir. I'm in Shiva. So Amalei Rabbi Chanina im hayu rabim tzrichim lo eino nimna. So Rabbi Chanina says, no, we know there's a halacha that if the masses need you, then you're not obligated to desist. You go ahead and you teach. So Savr L'ukmei Amora Alei. So his thinking was, okay, then I'll do it normatively. And normally the elder teacher would not have to exert himself strenuously to yell so that everyone could hear him. There were no mics. So you hired a special guy called an Amora. And his job was to project with a very loud voice the teachings of the Rosh Yeshiva or of the Rebbe. So he figured, okay, I'll just tell my Amora to go ahead and stand next to me and I'll tell him the shir. So Amarle Rav Tanya Uvulvat Shelo Yamet Turgaman. So Rav says, no, that you're not allowed to do that. That already looks too normative, it's too public. Because you're sitting Shiva, you have to do it with a shinoi in some way. Ve'elahechi yavid ki hadatanya ma'isa umeis benosh Rabbi Yehuda bar Iloi v'nichnas lebeis hamedrash v'nichnas Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya v'yoshav b'tzido v'lo chashu Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya v'Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya l'turgaman v'turgaman hishmiel l'rabim. You have to do it indirectly. The story is like this, that Rabbi Yehuda bar Iloi also suffered a loss. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya was by his side. So Rabbi Yehuda, who was the Avel, whispered the shir to Rabbi Chananya, and then Rabbi Chananya whispered it to the Turgaman, and then the Turgaman announced it publicly. Tanu Rabbanan. Avel Gimel Yomim Harishonim Asr Laniach Tefillin Mishlisha ve'elach u'shlishi bichlal Mutar Laniach Tefillin. So the Gemara is telling us actually now a machlokas about the wearing of tefillin during Avelus. It phrases it in a bit of a strange phraseology, but it essentially means like this: that for the first 2 days you're not allowed to wear tefillin during Shiva, and from day 3 and onwards, you're allowed to wear tefillin. And furthermore, Rabbi Eliezer says, this is all Rabbi Eliezer, and he further states that if a person comes for the first time, when it's your 3rd day of Shiva and you're putting on tefillin, you don't have to remove the tefillin to dispel suspicion that you're wearing tefillin for the first time on the first day of Shiva. Now, he doesn't know when you started Shiva, so therefore you might think that in order not to be Maris Ayin, that he's going to think that you're wearing tefillin in the beginning of Shiva, you might think you have to remove it. Says Rabbi Eliezer, you don't have to.
If you're in a Shiva house, it's your own Shiva.
Hold on, we're not going to paskin shilas right now because we're in the middle of a non-halachic discussion. Because as you'll see, Rabbi Gedalia, we don't paskin like any of this. Okay. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Avel Beis Yomim Harishonim Asr Laniach Tefillin Misheni V'Sheni B'Chlal Mutar Laniach Tefillin. So Rabbi Yeshua disagrees in 2 points. Point number 1, he says, to your assertion that for the first 2 days an Avel doesn't wear tefillin, not true. An Avel only does not wear tefillin on day 1, but from day 2 and onwards the Avel wears tefillin. That's number 1, I argue. Number 2 is Vimbo Panim Chadashos Choletz. And furthermore, says Rabbi Yoshua, if someone knew where to come from day 2 and onwards and see you wearing tefillin, you should take it off temporarily until the guy has a chance to settle in and get his bearings and see what's going on. And then afterwards, you could either when he leaves or after someone explains to him, you can put the tefillin back on. Amar of Masna, my time at the Rabbi Eliezer. So now the question is, what's Rabbi Eliezer's reasoning for saying that it's usher for 2 days? Because we see that there's some halacha about a mourning period of 2 days, because it says that the days in the plural of Moshe came to an end at the very end of the Torah in V'zos HaBaracha. So you see that the most intense portion of Avelus is the first 2 days. Amar of Ina, my time at the Rabbi Yeshua. So what's Rabbi Yeshua's reasoning? As it says in Sefer Amos, that I will turn your holidays into days of mourning, and in the end it will be like one long bitter day. So one bitter day. So we see that the intense day of mourning where you don't wear tefillin is only 1 day. Rabbi Yeshua nami haksiv vayitemu yemei v'goymer. So the Gemara asks, what is Rabbi Yeshua going to do with the fact that days is written in plural by Moshe? Amar lacha shiny Moshe takif avole. Moshe is an exception. He's the greatest person for the Jewish people, and therefore, even though normally it's only one day for a regular person, but for Moshe it was 2 days. Rabbi Eliezer nami haksiv yacharisaki yomar. So what is Rabbi Eliezer going to do with the fact that in Amos it says that it's only 1 day? So ikar marira chad yomahu. He agrees that the most intense period of mourning is on the first day, but it doesn't wane completely by day 2. On day 2 there also is an aspect of mourning, and therefore you don't wear tefillin the first 2 days. So now how do we paskin? Omar Ula, halacha keRebbi Eliezer b'chalitza, v'halacha keRebbi Yoshua b'hanacha. The halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer, that you only do not wear tefillin the first day, and the halacha is like Rebbe Yoshua, that when it comes to, let me just correct myself. The halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer when it comes to removing the tefillin, i.e., you do not have to remove the tefillin if someone new comes in and does not know what day of Shiva you're holding. We pass like Rebbe Eliezer that you don't have to remove the tefillin. And the halacha is like Rebbe Yoshua when it comes to only not wearing the tefillin for 1 day. You don't wear tefillin the first day, but every subsequent day of Shiva you do wear the tefillin. I didn't have a chance to review this in the poskim, but we know that when a person, at the time of the Kfura, the day of the burial, which is the day 1 of Shiva, we instruct the person not to put on tefillin for the first day. And there's a machlokas haposkim as to whether you're permitted to put on tefillin after the Kfura in the afternoon. So some poskim say yes, some poskim say no. That's a machlokas. So we give the person the option usually. We tell them if you want to, you can put on tefillin and recite Kriya Shema when you come home from the Beis HaKvaros if there's time.
With or without bracha?
I don't remember. I honestly don't remember.
Why would they be worried about the fact that a guy comes in? If a guy comes in, he knows that he doesn't know what day it is, so he would assume. I understand the opinion that is suggesting that he should take off his tefillin and put them on so he doesn't mislead the newcomer. I mean, anybody who walks into a shiva, it seems obvious that anybody who walks into a shiva and doesn't know what day it is would assume he saw tefillin on. They must not.
Yeah, I know. It sounds a little bit strange. I agree with you.
It's not like going to McDonald's to make a phone call.
No, I know, but I'm assuming that modes of communication are very, very limited, and it could be that we're dealing with a rabbi who comes in and meets his Talmud for the first time, thinking that he's just suffered a loss. So it could be that initially you have to take off the tefillin so that he shouldn't suspect you.
Could be the other way around. He might think, "What's this guy taking off his tefillin? It's day 3."
But then maybe he puts it on right afterwards, just to demonstrate, his knowledge of the halacha. Iboyelahu. So now the question is: now that Ula has paskined this hybrid psak, that on the one hand he holds you don't have to take off the tefillin like Rebbe Eliezer, but by paskin like Rebbe Yehoshua that you only do not wear the tefillin on day 1. So the question is, what about day 2? On day 2, remember, Rabbi Eliezer held that you don't wear tefillin, right? But on day 2, Rabbi Yeshua says you do wear tefillin, but you take it off when someone comes in. So according to Ula, who sort of has a hybrid of both psaks, the question is, on day 2, choletz o eno choletz. If someone comes in, would you take off the tefillin or not? So Tashma Omar Ula choletz umaniach afilu meya pa'amim. So the Ula had said that even though that I hold that from day 3 and onwards, you don't have to take it off when someone new comes in, but on day 2, if someone new comes in, take it off even 100 times if different people come in every few minutes. Tanya Nami Hachi Yehuda ben Tema Omer choletz umaniach afilu meya pa'amim, and that actually is confirmed in the Brisa. Rava Omar Kevin Shehiniach Shuveinu Choletz, and Rava disagrees. Rava says, I disagree with Ula, and I hold that even on day 2, once you put on the tefillin, you don't have to take it off. V'harava hu da'amar halacha ketana didan, da'amar shlosha. But wait a minute. Rava had said previously on DAF Chaf that there's a special din of 3 days of Avelus. So I don't understand. Why should Rava even hold like either of these opinions, either that you don't wear tefillin 1 day or you don't wear tefillin 2 days? A previous Tana in our Mishnah had said that the main Avelus is the first 3 days. If it's the first 3 days, according to Rabbi, you shouldn't wear tefillin for all 3 of the first days of Shiva. So the Gemara answer is mitzvah shiny. Yes, it's true that the major intensity of the mourning period is the first 3 days, but that doesn't mean that you can't do a mitzvah. So, in other words, Rava agrees. Like Rashi says, you can put on the tefillin immediately on day 2, even though the main intensity of Shiva is for the first 3 days. The two issues have nothing to do with each other. Doing the mitzvah of tefillin can be done even when you're in the midst of your mourning period. The reason why we don't wear tefillin on the first day, like Hashem said to Yechezkel, Pe'ercha chavush alecha, that only you, Yechezkel, are allowed to have this beautification upon you, but a regular mourner cannot. So therefore, Rava's argument that the most intense part of the Shiva is the first 3 days is independent of this idea of doing the mitzvah of tefillin. Tana Rabbanan, Avel gimel yomim harishonim aser b'malacha, va'afilu ani hamisparnis min tzedaka, mikan va'elach osa b'tzina b'soch beisa. So the Brisa now says the Avel for the first 3 days is not allowed to work. And that's true even if he's destitute, even if he's very poor to the point where he's reliant on tzedakah, and therefore you could argue perhaps to justify his working that's even more necessary. No, even that kind of person cannot work. But what he can do is from that point onwards, and it's not clear whether day 3 do we say Mexis Hayom Kekulo. It's a little bit ambiguous from the Brisa, but I believe we do say that from day 3 is the intensity starts to leave after the beginning of day 3. Then we say that he's allowed to work privately in his home away from the public view. The ha'isha tova biplach b'soch beisa, and similarly from day 3 and onwards, a woman is allowed to spin or weave within her house. Tanu Rabbanan Avel Gimel Yomim Harishonim Eino Holech LeBeisa Avel Mikan Va'elach Holech Ve'ena Yoshev B'Makam HaMenachem El B'Makam HaMisnachamin. Related halacha is that an Avel is allowed to fulfill the mitzvah of Nichum Avelim to others, but not within the first 3 days of Shiva. But from day 3 and onwards, he's allowed to leave his house, go to another mourner's house to be Menachem Avel, and so therefore he can fulfill that mitzvah. But when he sits there in the second Avel's house, he should not sit with the people on the big chairs offering Neshama, but he should sit with the Avelim on the low chairs. Tanu Rabbana Avel Gimel Yomim Harishonim Aser B'She'ela Shalom Mishlosha V'Yad Shiva Meishav Ve'eno Shoel Mikan Va'elach Sholo Meishav Kedarka. So the Brisa now tells us that there are 3 levels. Okay, for the first 3 days, he's not allowed to greet other people and say, "How are you? Peace upon you," and so forth. From day 3 until the Shiva is over, he's allowed to respond to other people's greetings, but he's not allowed to initiate the greeting. But from Shiva and onwards, then he's allowed to greet people and respond to people's greetings as normal. Okay? Now we're going to break this down very carefully in just a moment. Shlosha Yomim Harishonim Aser B'She'ela Shalom. So 1 second. For the first 3 days, he's not allowed to greet anyone at all. Let me show you a story that contradicts that. V'hatanya Maisa Umesu Banav Shel Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva tragically lost 2 sons, and at the Levaya Nichnusu Kol Yisrael V'Hispidum Hesped Gadol. That all of the throngs of Jewish people, hundreds upon thousands of Jews came, and they came to the Hesped. They came to the Levaya. B'shas Petirasan Amad Rabbi Akiva Al Safsel Gadol V'Omar. So as they were leaving, as the Levaya was ending, Rabbi Akiva got up and stood on a big bench and announced to all of the people that were there, Achenu Beis Yisrael Shimu, that my brethren, our brethren, the house of Israel, listen. Afilu Shnei Bonim Chasanim Menuchamhu B'Shvil Kavod She'asisem. That even if my 2 sons were chasanim, even if they were grooms about to go to the chuppah, which even adds to the tragedy of their deaths, your presence here was sufficient nechama for me. V'im b'shvil Akiva basem, harei kama Akiva b'shok. And I know that you didn't come because my name is Akiva. I know you didn't come because of my pretty face, because there are plenty of Akivas in the market, right? Elakach amartem, Toras Elokav belibo, v'kol shekem sheschartem kaful. But rather, I know it's because of the Torah that I possess, and therefore, because you came to give honor to Torah, your reward is multiple. And therefore, l'chu levatechem l'shalom, go to your homes in peace. The kasha is, how could Rabbi Akiva give a blessing of peace? That's tantamount to she'ela shalom. That's a greeting of peace upon you. So how could he do that if it's mamish the first day of Shiva? The Gemara answers, kavod rabim shiny. Normally, you can't do that if you're an Avel, the first 3 days. However, kavod rabim, because it was the whole entire Jewish community that came out, we make an exception for the honor of the community. Now, Migimel, now let's go to the next part of the Brisa. Migimel v'ad zayin meishiv ve'eno shol, mikan va'elach sholo meishiv kedarka. From day 3 to day 7, you can respond, but you cannot initiate greeting. And once Shiv is over, you can greet normally. So, Urminu, let's raise a contradiction. Amod says chavero avel. If a guy comes along and discovers that his friend is in avelus, v'soch lamed yom medaber imo tanchumin ve'eno shol bishlomo. Then for the first 30 days, if it's within Shloshim, you are allowed to offer him words of consolation, but you cannot greet him. La'achar lamed yom, shol bishlomo, ve'eno medaber imo tanchumin. Once the 30 days are over, so then you can greet him, and it's already now too late to offer him words of consolation. And we'll explain why. Now, Mesa Ishto, Vinasa Isha Acheres. Now, if, let's say, a man who is sitting Shiva for his wife who passes away, and within the Shloshim, he marries another woman. Now, that sounds pretty cold, huh? So,
they have multiple wives. Unless he killed his wife.
Yeah, I know, but it's still cold. I mean, your wife, the corpse is barely cold, and you're going ahead and marrying someone else. So Rashi explains. We're going to discuss this later, but Rashi explains it's talking about a person who hasn't yet fulfilled the mitzvah of pru or vu. So therefore, we're pushing him. You got to have kids. You got to fulfill the mitzvah. So that's why. But we still have to be sensitive to his new wife, and therefore, Eino Rashai Likanis Lebeis L'Daber Imo Tanchumen. You can't go in the presence of the new wife and say, "Oh, Rachel, she was so wonderful, she was so amazing." You can't offer him words of Tanchumen in front of the new wife. So Matzu B'Shuk Omer Lo B'Safa Rafa U'V'Kovid Rosh. But if you find him in the marketplace and his new wife is not there, then you could speak to him with soft words of consolation and with a heavy head. So what do we see from this brisa? This brisa is saying that greetings are not permitted the entire Shloshim, not just during Shiva. So how could that be? How do you reconcile this? Amar Ravidi bar Abin hu shol b'shlom acherim sh'acherim shruim b'shalom acherim ein shon b'shlomo shehu eino shari b'shalom. The answer is very simple. This brisa is talking about others greeting him, right? So, but others greeting him cannot be done even after Shiva. They have to wait until after Shloshim. But the Avel himself is allowed to greet others because they're not in a state of suffering. They're not in a state of mourning, so I'm allowed to greet them. They're perfectly fine. It's just that they're not allowed to greet me. Right? So that's the difference. Once Shiv is over, the Avel, am allowed to greet others. But for the entire Shloshim, no one's allowed to greet me until the Shloshim is over. So wait a minute, says the Gemara. So wait a minute. But even after day 3, we said that the Novel is allowed to respond to other people's greetings. How can you tell me that the whole Shloshim, no one's allowed to greet him? How then does he respond to their greeting? The Gemara answers, the Lo Yadi. The answer is that they're not aware that he's an Ava. Meaning that really, al pi halacha, no one's allowed to greet him the entire Shloshim. But if someone does greet him, he's allowed to respond to the greeting. That's permitted even in the middle of Shiva, as long as it's after the 3rd day. Frek the Gemara, ihachi hasam nami. So then why is it that in the first 3 days, why can't he respond to their greetings? So the more answer is hasamoda lahu v'lo mahadar lahu. The answer is because the mourning is so intense that we don't even give him the pleasure of responding to other people's greetings. There, he's actually obligated to say to them, "I'm sorry, my dear friend, I'm an avil, and I'm not able to respond to your greeting."
How long do we have it in today? How long? What's the minute about saying a makom to somebody after?
You'll see in just a minute. Let's just wait until we get to the end. So the Gemara says, but from day 3 to day 7, you're not obligated to inform. You're not obligated to inform. You only you can just respond to the greeting. So now the Gemara says, Uraminu. So now let's raise a contradiction. You told me that during the Shloshim, other people are not allowed to greet him. He's allowed to respond to their greeting if they don't know, and he's allowed to initiate greeting. Now let's look at another brisa. Hamod says chavero avel b'soch yud beis chodesh medaber imo tanchumin ve'eno shol b'shlomo. That if you find your friend is an avel within the first 12 months, this is not shloshim anymore. This is a full 12 months. Then you're allowed to offer him tanchumim during the first 12 months, and you're not allowed to greet him normally. La'achar yud beis chodesh ol bishlomo ve'ena medaber imo tenchum. And it's only after 12 months that you can greet him normally, and it's already now too late to offer him words of consolation. Avol medaber imo minatzah. But what you can do is you can speak to him indirectly, which means don't say, I'm so sorry for the loss of your so-and-so, but you say, I hope Hashem gives you comfort, and you don't specify any more than that. That's what Rashi says, what it means, min hatzad. Don't be descriptive any more than just Hashem should give you nechama. So Amar Rabbi Meir, Hamod seis chavero ovel la'achar yud beis chodesh u'medaber imu tanchum l'mahu doime. He says, Rabbi Meir says, let me explain to you what the problem is when you try to console someone for a loss that's older than 12 months. He says, you know why that's wrong? He says, La'adam shenishber raglo v'chaysa matza orofe v'amr lo klach etzli shani shovro ve'erpaenu k'dei shuteda shesamamomen shali yafim. So he says, it's like this. A guy broke his leg, and he spent a long time healing and rehabbing, and he's finally got a healed leg. A doctor then comes over to him after his leg is healed and says, let me break your leg for you, and then I'll heal it for you to show you how good of a doctor I am. So he says that sounds pretty ridiculous. In other words, once a guy has healed from the anguish of suffering this loss, why bring up old wounds? Why revive the suffering after 12 months are over? And therefore, you're not supposed to mention it explicitly because you're opening up old wounds. But instead, what are you supposed to do? You should just say indirectly, Hashem should give you a nechama. So the Gemara says what you see from here is that the avelus of the prohibition on greeting lasts for a full 12 months, not just shloshim. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha ha ba'av v'imo ha b'shar krovim. The answer is quite simple. The previous brisa, which says that it lasts shloshim, was talking about when other relatives die other than your parents. But when a parent dies, then the avelus is for a full 12 months because you have to show a special kibbut ava'im to have a mourning period of much longer, of a full 12 months. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, then during the first 30 days of when you lose a sibling or a spouse, why then doesn't it say over there too that you could, after the 30 days are over, offer him indirect consolation of just say Hashem should console you? That's true of the previous price as well. Even though it doesn't say so explicitly, what it means is that you can console a person after shloshim indirectly, meaning being non-specific. Now we get on to another topic which we're just going to start today and we'll finish it tomorrow, which has to do with the halacha of what you're supposed to do when you have a family of mourners. You know, the patriarch of the family dies. You have, let's say, multiple siblings. So you have 7 kids, and you've got 6 of the kids sitting shiva in the house, and one sibling is coming from out of town, and he comes a day or two later than when everyone else started sitting shiva because he didn't know about it. He was traveling, whatever. When does his shiva start, and when does his shiva end? So that's the question. So Avel Gimel Yamam Arishonim Bami Mokum Karov Mona Imahem Bami Mokum Rachok Mona La'atzmo. So the halacha is as follows: if he's within the same general area, but he just didn't hear about it and he came a day or two late, as long as it's within the first 3 days of their shiva, he can commence sitting shiva with them, and he gets up from shiva with them. So therefore, if they already sat 2 days and he only comes at the beginning of day 3, he counts 5 days of shiva, right? And then when the 7th day, he gets up with the rest of the family. Tosfos says what's called proximal, what's called within the area, 10 parsas. If he was in 10 parsa radius, he's within their general shechuna, and therefore he's tafel to the family. But if he comes from a faraway distance, he's considered to be completely disconnected from the rest of the family, and therefore even if he comes within the first 3 days, he has to start shiva separately from them, and he gets up from shiva after his 7 days, not after their 7 days. Mikan va'elach afilu bo mimakam karov mona la'atzma. And then the Tanna Kama says that if, however, he comes from day 4, right, or late in the day in day 3, perhaps even, then in that situation, even if he comes from a nearby place, he cannot be considered tafel to the rest of the family. He's got to start his own shiva. He starts when he starts, and he ends when he ends, even if it's a couple days later. Rabbi Shimon Omer, afilu ba b'yom hashvi mimakam karov mona iman. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. He says as long as he's within the geographic area of 10 parsas, then even if he comes on day 7, he can sit shiva for just a few minutes and get up with the rest of the family. Amar Mar. So let's just go back. Gimel Yamam Harishonim Bami Makam Karav Mona Iman. That the master taught that if a person comes for the first 3 days, he should count together with the family, as long as he comes from a nearby place. So Amr B'chia Bar Abba, Amr Rabbi Yechanan, V'hu sheyesh gadol habayis babayis, with one proviso, that the elder of the house has to be with the group that's sitting Shiva in the house. Then we say that the sibling, that sole sibling that's coming late, is considered to be tafel, is ancillary to their Shiva, and he therefore commences together with them and gets up together with them. What do we mean by the Gadol Habayis? This is a very lengthy halachic discussion. Gadol Habayis basically means the guy who really is the handler of the household. It doesn't necessarily mean the oldest sibling. It could mean the guy who takes charge. The guy who takes charge of the mishpacha, takes care of the assets, takes care of the finances, takes care of, make sure his sisters are always taken care of. That's the Gadol Habayis. So if he's with the other siblings, so then this sibling who comes from a distance is considered to be tafel or ancillary to them, and he's nigrar after whatever they're doing, right? But if he's the Gadol Habayis and all of the other subservient siblings are sitting Shiva, then even if they've already started for a couple of days, he's never considered to be tafel to them, and he starts sitting Shiva on his own, and he finishes whenever he finishes. We'll continue this in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.